Oh, just a reminder as well that there is a hashtag, so FFS 2021, that's running on Twitter. So if you want to send some tweets out about anything that's happening today, that's the hashtag to use. And there was quite a few tweets yesterday that used that. Okay. So I'll move on to our first keynote, which is Professor Moya Kneafsey, the Centre for Agroecology, Water and Resilience at Coventry University. Now, Moya is a professor at CORE, as the acronym for Agroecology, Water and Resilience Centre. So Moya works concerns kind of traditional cultural resources and how they can be modified for tourism, especially in European rural context, as well as attempts to reconnect consumers, producers, and food for alternative local and short food supply chains. She's undertaken projects on cultural tourism, quality products, rural development, and community participation in food production and consumer perceptions of food security. Moya leads the community self-organisation and resilience theme at the Centre for Agroecology, Water and Resilience. And it's quite kind of poignant for me to introduce Moya, because Moya was my undergraduate, master's and PhD supervisor here. So she's been really influential for me about kind of my journey of becoming a researcher and really kind of getting into food issues as well. So it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Moya for her keynote presentation.
Thanks, Jordan. And yeah, as you say, we've worked together for a long time and it's been absolutely great. And thank you very much for the invitation to speak today, and for all the work that you and the team have done to organise this excellent two-day event. Thanks very much, and I appreciated the summary as well that you provided just now. That was really helpful. So yes, morning everybody, and thanks for the introduction, Jordan. I guess I could just go straight to, I do have a few slides, so let me just go to those now. So 1 second. Can you see those, my screen okay?
Yep, we can see that.
Yeah, great. And I think because I'm going to try and talk for about 20 minutes, but Jordan, do just shout if I'm going past anything past that. But I'll try. I think I've got about 20 minutes here. So so what I was wanting to talk about this morning, so just to introduce the slide, you can see the picture there. As Jordan mentioned, I work at Centre for Agroecology, Water and Resilience, or CORE for short. I just thought it'd be nice to share a photo of the site, which is located just outside Coventry, kind of semi-rural location. And our offices are kind of at the slopey green roofs, you can see kind of in the middle of the picture. And then to the right, you can see some greenhouses, and in the bottom corner is you can just see the edge of a community supported agriculture scheme, who are our neighbours, and who are, I would say, very much an example of a part of a perhaps an emergent concept of territorial food systems. So that's just to set the scene. Sadly, I'm not there today. I'm at home, but hopefully soon we'll be going back to work out at Brighton. So, and just to say as well, so as Jordan mentioned, I've been working on short food chains and alternative food networks for quite some time. And so the talk today is, I was really trying to draw together some of that work and also work that I'm doing currently on a fairly new project, which is the Coach project, and you can see the logo there. You can, the website's coach.eu or something very easy to find. But this project is also looking at collaborative agri-food chains in the context of territorial food systems. So I'm also drawing on that kind of new work as well. So that's just by way of introduction. So I suppose thinking about, just to give you a brief outline, so I'll talk a little bit about the context and then some comments on conceptualizing territorial food systems. What are they? What does the term mean, or what could it mean? some of the drivers of those, and then conclusions and further questions. And so, as the little note says at the bottom of the screen, it is work in progress, and very much, you know, welcome the opportunity to discuss it, and yeah, hopefully continue refining it and with any comments or feedback. So in terms of the context then, the context, as we well know, and as Jordan mentioned, really is a situation of a crisis, Earth crisis. And I'm sure everyone's more than aware of all the quite, you know, the existential challenges that are facing us right now. I've listed some on the screen there and chosen just one image which helps to represent that sense of crisis, particularly in terms of the climate change. And many commentators argue that it's now or never for transitions and transformation of agri-food systems to something which is more sustainable and which also delivers on social justice. The recent publication, The Long Food Movement, by the IPES Food Panel and the ETC group in March earlier this year, provides quite a terrifying summary of the critical issues now facing humanity and agriculture and food systems, which are implicated in these changes, but are also going to be impacted by the effects of these crises. So this is the context and the idea that we're kind of reaching, we're at this tipping point where we cannot continue with business as usual. There needs to be transitions to different ways of doing things. And so, and I don't think many people would disagree that there's a need for agriculture and food systems which deliver sustainability and social justice. But the question is, what do those systems look like? How can transitions be enabled? How can it happen quickly as well? And there's lots of actors who are all trying to achieve these transitions and deliver it and want to deliver healthy and nutritious food, and want to deliver on sustainability. But that doesn't mean to say they all have the same idea about how to do that, or even, you know, what sustainable agri-food systems look like, or what sustainability, how it could be measured, for instance, and how it can be agreed on what sustainability even is. So this is the context. And the question I put, territorial food systems, a relevant concept for the future of food, ? It implies that they might not be relevant, but as hopefully becomes clear, I want to argue that they are relevant and that they are very important and a concept for thinking about the future of food and putting the future of food into practice. And I think that territorial food systems can provide a vital framework. And I think we also have some of the building blocks already for these kinds of food systems that could be scaled up and they could be supported with policies. But I think to do that, we need to really recognise the full value of food as something which really nourishes us as individuals and communities in different ways. And I think this was something which really came across in the panel I was listening to yesterday at the end of the day, when it was discussed about, you know, the kind of social relationships that Marsha's work is really highlighting this, the social relationships we enjoy through food, and also the kind of food environments we move in. And also we can think about the landscapes that are created and the habitability of the planet, and food is implicated in all of those things. So it's a multi-dimensional value of food. So to set the scene then, really, I think it's useful to think of different competing visions or paradigms that are competing for the future of food. And it's not clear which one will win out, or if we maybe end up with kind of mixture of these sorts of paradigms. And Hans Viskirk in 2009 put this I thought it was quite a useful framing, and lots of people have referred to it since, where he's talked about these agri-industrial paradigm and the territorial agri-food paradigm, and they're contrasting paradigms. So the agri-industrial one is really characterized by a hypermodern food geography. It has processes of disconnection where geographical distance and the social distance between producers and consumers is increased. It's characterized by disembedding, so local or regional character of foods disappearing. This idea of placeless foods, which some may have spoken about, and then disentwining producers and suppliers and retailers and consumers disconnected from each other due to specialization in the food chain. And this is contrasted with the territorial agri-food paradigm, which features reconnection. So food chain actors from producers to consumers, reconnecting, forming regional networks, also embedding, so the distance between production and consumption is shortened, and social, cultural landscape features of the region are embedded in the food, and intertwining, synergies develop between the different economic and non-economic actors. So I think these paradigms, it's a useful framing device, although I think it's also important to recognise that they're not always completely separate. So that's different types of food systems interact and they respond to each other, and their farmers and other food actors will operate within both paradigms simultaneously. So I think it's important that we don't sort of think in two binary terms when we're thinking about this. So just to illustrate briefly, some of the work on alternative food networks has shown that they interconnect with the conventional food sector, for example, in terms of the inputs that go into their supply chains. And also consumers, of course, access food in all different ways. Can be from domestic or community food growing, emergency food provision, sharing, supermarkets, corner shops, markets, delivery schemes. So it is a complex picture, and which I think we need to also keep in mind. But nevertheless, I think even but laying out the kind of the differences is still useful as a kind of a framing, a kind of point of departure for thinking about where we could go in the future. So in terms of the territorial food system, then, well, what do we mean by that? And I think maybe the first thing to say, it's a concept which is being identified in Europe and around the world, sort of globally, as having unmet potential. So there's been a few reports and some, especially from more the kind of civil society organisations, to argue that territorial food systems are important and could have more potential. But I think it's also an emergent concept. It's still something which is, developing, and there's a lot of work going into, I think, thinking about it, but also building it in practice. And also, it's not necessarily that this is a term which is used by everybody, but it's kind of useful, I think, as an umbrella term for us to think with. And I think some of the precedents, there's lots, but I just picked out a couple which kind of struck me as important and interesting. And one is coming from the the Civil Society, CSM, Civil Society Mechanism of the Committee on World Food Security. And so they wrote a report 2016, which champions the concept of territorial food markets. And their angle is really coming at how can small-scale farmers and producers access markets and have a fair living and decent livelihood. And so they are really championing territorial food markets, which are situated in and identified with specific areas. The scale of the market can range from, the scale of the area could be a village or a district or a region. So that scale is kind of something which is movable depending on the place-based situation and needs. And in the report, they set out a number of features of these territorial food markets, and there's quite a few, but just to pick out a few which I think are especially important. One is that they're inclusive and diversified. So there's a wide range of products that are sold in the markets. Secondly, they perform multiple economic, social, cultural and ecological functions. So it's what I was saying before about how food has those multiple functions and meanings. So these markets, there are places to socialize, share information, build communities and so on. They're also remunerative for smallholders and provide them more control of the conditions of access and the prices than, let's say, more mainstream sort of value chains, and gives them some autonomy, more autonomy in negotiating. And they have governance systems which operate to commonly shared rules which are negotiated between producers and local authorities. So those are just some of the features of these territorial markets. And then the other thread, which I think is really important in all this, is urban food strategies. So there's, as we know, lots of work happening around urban food strategies, around city food regions, urban food policy councils, and so on, and a lot of experience has built up and knowledge has built up around that. And they tend to take a very, a more kind of systemic view, and they're not only focused on markets, or they might be looking at markets, but they're also looking very holistically at the kind of relationships in the food system more broadly, and links with food and health and economy, local development. So having that kind of holistic sense of how food systems and agriculture systems interact with others. And so this is really shifting from the more conventional sector-based and supply-side focus towards a more holistic approach, which looks at the links between the different product sectors, different food chain actors, consumers, communities, and new governance structures. And an interesting paper on that has been written by Anna Miregus-Faus and colleagues based on their research around the Cardiff area, and drawing on quite a range of different literatures to build the concept. So, for example, the diverse economies literature, which champions different ways of thinking about the economy and all the activities that underpin the more formal economy. So activities which are often unpaid and don't have a monetary value. So, for example, unpaid care work, which underpins so much of our formal economy, and without which the societies would sort of grind to a halt. And also they use distributed economies concept, so how small and medium-sized enterprises self-organize at regional scales, and this supports innovation and knowledge sharing. So the ideas of like networked economies, which have multiple nodes of decision making and have symbiotic relationships. So I could speak a little bit more about some of these ideas because I've slightly lost track of time in terms of how long I've been speaking. I don't know, how long have I got left, Jordan?
So there's 15 minutes including questions, so you could do 5 or 10.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, so I was just talking about Miregus-Faus and her colleagues and the work that they've been doing on territorial food systems. And they talked about diverse economies, distributed economies, and also a place-based approach, and I think this place-based approach and the literature around place-based approaches is really important and helpful as well, because it builds around ideas about a progressive sense of place, or what Goodman and Dupuy called a reflexive politics in place. So a kind of politics of place identity, which really engages with the diversity of people, experiences and cultures within a geographical area, and works against sort of defensive or exclusionary localism, which has been associated with some types of alternative food network or some elements of local food. So these ideas I'm hoping that I'm conveying is a kind of drawing together of concepts and ideas around this kind of sense of food, the way that agri-food systems could be organized on a particular scale, which is localized, but where that scale is works, it will depend in on different places and the conditions that are there, but also importantly, the governance of that is based around principles of inclusion, democratic participation, and delivering multiple outcomes from agri-food systems, whether that be, health, environmental goods, livelihoods, food sovereignty, food justice, these ideas. So hopefully I'm conveying that sense of how those things are kind of coming together as I see it. So let me move on a bit. So what are some of the drivers of these? And I've just picked out some which I think are important. I think politicization of food. So I think we're seeing this a lot more, the rise of food sovereignty and food justice movements, environmental and racial justice, urban food strategies, and how these are kind of really driving, I think, interest in food, but also realizing that the politics of food and kind of unearthing that politics. And I think that's an important, those movements in different parts of the world are very, very important for kind of driving change and also building the actual practices as well that form the territorial food systems. There's also socio-cultural and economic trends. These could really range. Even if we think about the UK context, some of the drivers, the cost of living, food prices, which are expected to be impacted by some of the changes coming through from COVID and also from Brexit, certainly in terms of expecting food prices to be volatile at any rate. Also inequalities, diet-related ill health, small farmer and small business and producer incomes and their margins, and also the role of media and celebritization of food. These all kind of interlink really, I suppose, with politicization of food in terms of driving interest in and awareness of the role of food. And then, of course, the environmental crisis, which I've already mentioned, climate, biodiversity, soil and water degradation, pollution. Again, food is central to all those, and I think there's obviously growing awareness of that and recognition of that there needs to be change. And then cutting across them all, I think COVID-19, which has been talked about over this symposium, clearly it's intensified some of those, some trends which are already there, or kind of shone a light on trends were there. Things like the existence of deep-rooted food poverty, and it's really opened that up. It was there, but it's opened it up, and it's also intensified that problem. Also issues around health. We've become, it's through the experience of COVID, we're becoming more aware of the impacts of diet-related ill health and how that intersects with poor outcomes from COVID. So COVID's acting as a sort of magnifier, I think, an intensifier of some of the trends that are driving towards ideas around territorial food systems as a different way forward. Okay, so so to wrap it up then, I think hopefully, so what I've been trying to say is the territorial food systems, which, as I'm trying to stress, it's kind of emergent, but there's lots of building blocks there already. There's lots of examples of initiatives which we could see, which I think you can start to draw into this sort of framework. It can play a vital role in transitions to sustainability. And so it's not, I'm stressing, it's not just a kind of theoretical idea. There's already front runners or prefigurative innovations like short food chains, like the growing interest in public sector procurement as a lever for sustainability transition. I think that's a really interesting area with a lot of unmet potential. Also, civic food networks, which already we see them. But what's interesting, I think, to look at is how these things can be scaled out, how they can be kind of networked and maybe conceptualized as kind of part of an overall conceptualization of how food systems could be reorganized. And I think it's also I also wanted to say that previous research on alternative food networks, for instance, is helpful and we can build on it. One of the key things which I think comes out a lot of that research is about it's important not to romanticize the local. So Bourne and Purcell's famous paper 2006 talked about the local trap. And I think we equally need to be aware of the territorial trap. So it's not about romanticizing a kind of relocalization, but instead thinking about the important values that we would like to build agri-food systems on, you know, then that kind of values-based foundation, which others have also spoken about, and being aware that anything which is talking about, you know, localism, or we need to be thinking in terms of the inclusivity of that concept and not falling into exclusive or defensive kind of positions. I think there's the vital role of civil society and farmer-led and community-led initiatives, which I've tried to emphasise, and that governance is key. And there are lots of questions still and challenges about what scale are decisions made at, who makes the decisions, how is democratic participation enabled and for people to participate in the politics of food, and then how can social justice be kind of put central into all that. And as I mentioned already about scale, what's the best scale for territorial food systems? It will be different in different contexts, and how do you work that out? How do you work out the answer to that question? So lots of questions and lots of challenges, but I think, yeah, as we sort of try to get through the pandemic and as the effects of thinking about UK in particular, as the effects of Brexit start to play through the agriculture and food system, I think it's really important to look at these ideas and these innovations and think how to support them and create space for them to grow. So I'll wrap it up there, Jordan. I hope I didn't go over time.
Only by a few minutes, that's fine. We've got maybe 6 minutes now for questions, but thank you, Moya. That's fantastic. It really brings together a lot of the work that I kind of know that you're kind of well known for, you know, the alternative food network work, etc. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's what I was trying to do is trying to draw things together and put them into sort of a framework. But I think the territorial food systems work that's coming out and the ideas that are coming out, you know, offers this way to conceptualize the links between a lot of different innovations.
Yeah, and it does seem like a really kind of poignant time to push forward these types of food networks. There was a